The night begins quietly, as it often does in the world of forgotten things. The stars appear one by one above the Mediterranean, and the air holds the warmth of a day that has finally surrendered to dusk. Far below, where the sea breathes against the ancient stones, two worlds rest side by side, Greece and Rome. Once, they burned with ambition and fire, each carving its name into the bones of history. But tonight, in this imagined hour between memory and sleep, they lie together beneath a single silver moon, and the boundaries between them blur like ink in water. You can almost hear the hush that settles over the ruins. Somewhere in Greece, a column still stands where a temple once reached toward the sky. The marble is cool now, its edges worn smooth by centuries of wind. A few miles away, olive trees sway gently, their leaves whispering to the air. Across the sea, in the heart of what was once Rome, the stones of an old forum rest beneath a thin layer of moonlight.
Ow.
The roads that once roared with triumph are silent now. All that remains are the faint outlines of what was arches, pillars, doorways that lead nowhere, yet still seem to wait for someone to pass through. If you stand still enough, if you let your mind grow as quiet as the night, you can almost feel them, not the people themselves, but the pulse of their presence. Greece is delicate and dreaming, filled with philosophers and poets, her stories woven from sea foam and starlight. Rome, heavy and steady, her power carved in marble, her words like stone tablets pressed into time. And between them, like a soft current, flows something invisible, yet eternal story. For both Greece and Rome, story was breath. It was the way they explained the trembling of the earth, the roll of thunder, the sorrow of the heart. Their myths were not arguments, they were mirrors. In those mirrors, the people saw their fears, their pride, their love, their smallness beneath the wide sky. And so, as centuries unfolded, their stories began to mingle. The Greeks spoke first of Zeus, who ruled the heavens, of Hera, whose jealousy shaped destinies, of Athena, who walked the world in wisdom's calm light. The Romans listened, and in time, they began to tell those stories in their own voice. Zeus became Jupiter. Hera became Juno. Athena became Minerva. But the essence, that glowing thread at the center, remained. It is tempting to ask who borrowed from whom, as if stories could be owned. But myths are travelers. They do not belong to the place where they were born. They wander across lands and languages, carried by sailors, soldiers, traders, lovers. A Greek whisper told to a Roman ear becomes something new, not stolen, but transformed. A Roman poet writes it down, and suddenly the gods wear different names. Walk different streets, yet they breathe the same air. Imagine a night thousands of years ago. On the coast of Greece, a fisherman sits by his small fire, the waves hissing against the rocks. He tells his children about Poseidon, the god who lives beneath the sea, whose moods can calm or destroy. His words float upward with the smoke. I'll picture another night, a generation later, across the water. A Roman traveler sits by another fire, telling his companions about Neptune, the sea's ruler. The names are different, but the rhythm of the tale is the same. The sea still glimmers beneath the moon. The waves still breathe. The story still lives. That is how myths survive, not by ownership, but by sharing. Each time they are told, they change a little, the way the sea reshapes the shore, and in that change, they stay alive. The Greeks dreamed their gods into being. The Romans gave them new homes. Between the two civilizations, mythology flowed like a river, carrying pieces of both worlds within it. In this twilight of imagination, we might picture the gods themselves wandering between the two lands. Perhaps Zeus stands at the edge of Olympus, looking westward, toward the hills of Rome. Perhaps he smiles, sensing his reflection there, wearing another name. Perhaps Athena walks the streets of Athens at dusk, her golden spear lowered, her eyes soft with knowing. Far away, Minerva mirrors her, patient, composed, wise in her own right. Between them there is no rivalry, only recognition. The divine, after all, is vast enough to hold two faces, two voices, two dreams. Even the landscapes seem to mirror one another in this half-light. The seas that carried Greek ships also bore Roman ones. The same winds that whispered through olive groves in Attica drifted over the vineyards of Latium. And when the moon rose over both, its light did not choose sides, touched every shore with the same calm glow. Under that shared light, Greece and Rome became like two reflections of the same dream, one shimmering in poetry, the other in stone. Now, in the silence of centuries, those echoes are all that remain. The myths themselves, though ancient, still breathe faintly in the corners of our imagination. They rise when we look at a statue, when we hear the sea, we stand beneath thunderclouds and feel something vast stir in the air. Greece and Rome may have built empires, but their truest legacy lies in these whispers, the stories that once lulled children to sleep, once explained the rain, the stars, the heart. So tonight, as the world outside grows still, we let those echoes drift through our minds. A question, who borrowed from whom, fades into something softer. Maybe the gods were never borrowed at all. Maybe they simply wandered, as stories do, from one voice to another, grateful to be remembered. Maybe they linger even now, resting among the ruins, half asleep, waiting for someone to tell their tales again. And as we imagine them there, the old gods, the silent temples, the long shadows stretching over the sea, we too begin to drift. The boundary between memory and dream blurs, just as Greece and Rome once did. The stars overhead shimmer faintly, the ruins breathe, and somewhere far in the distance, a storyteller begins again, his voice slow, his words gentle, his story timeless. There are nights when the wind itself seems to carry ancient words, though we cannot quite make out their meaning. They roll softly through the air, like the hush of distant waves, or the echo of a voice calling from far beyond the mountains. It is in those quiet moments when the world feels half asleep that we might imagine the old gods whispering once more. Not loud, not grand, but gentle. Perhaps they never left. Perhaps they simply lowered their voices so we would have to slow down to hear them. In the earliest days, when Greece still dreamed beneath the light of her young sun, the gods were everywhere. They were in the rumble of thunder, in the rush of the river, in the spark of fire that leapt from the hearth. They were not distant beings, but neighbors, unpredictable, proud, sometimes kind, sometimes cruel. The people told stories not to worship, but to understand. Every breeze could be the sigh of a goddess, every storm the anger of a god. The myths were not carved in stone. They were breathed, sung, woven through daily life like smoke through air. Now picture the same wind crossing the sea, gliding low over the dark waves until it reaches another shore, the land that would one day be Rome. The people there. Too looked to the skies, to the soil, to the flickering stars. They had their spirits and protectors, their small household deities who guarded the doorways and the fires. But when the Greeks came, their myths arrived like bright constellations, stories already shining, names already whispered. And Rome listened. Rome always listened. She took what was beautiful and made it her own, not out of theft, but out of admiration. The gods' names changed as they crossed the water, as all things do when they travel. Zeus became Jupiter, his thunder softer now, more measured. Aphrodite, the sea-born goddess of love, became Venus, radiant and composed. Ares, wild with fury, became Mars, disciplined, purposeful, carrying not only war, but duty. The Greeks told their stories like poetry. The Romans retold them like law. Yet beneath both, the same heartbeat pulsed, the need to make sense of a world that could be both kind and cruel. If you close your eyes, you might imagine those gods standing at the edge of time, whispering to each other. Perhaps they wondered, as we do, about the strange way their names changed, their temples moved, their faces redrawn. Did Hermes recognize himself when he became Mercury, his wings still glimmering, but his messages now bound to Roman order? Did Artemis, the quiet huntress, know herself as Diana, wandering through Roman woods beneath another moon? Or did they simply smile and continue on, content to exist in two reflections, knowing that no mortal tongue could hold their full truth? For the gods, perhaps it did not matter who borrowed from whom. What mattered was that they were remembered. Each retelling, each translation, was another breath of life. When a Roman child whispered a prayer to Venus, the sea stirred just as it once had for Aphrodite. When a soldier lifted his eyes to Mars before battle, the old Greek spirit of Ares stirred within him. The gods adapted, as all living things must, taking on the shape of new dreams. And yet, sometimes, in the stillness between centuries, you can feel a faint longing. A trace of homesickness, perhaps not for a place, but for the time when stories were everything. when the gods did not live on pedestals or in pages, but in the rustle of the wind through cypress trees, in the shimmer of light on water. That was when myth was alive, not a lesson, not a history, but a presence. As the centuries passed, the voices of the gods grew quieter. The temples cracked, the fires went out, and new words filled the air. But even silence has memory. The sea still remembers the songs once sung to Poseidon and Neptune. The forests still remember the laughter of Pan, and sometimes, when the night is still enough, the old whispers return. You might not hear them clearly, but you feel them, like a shiver of ancient recognition running through the dark. It is easy, from our modern world, to imagine these myths as old and distant, their power faded with time. But perhaps they are not gone. Perhaps they are simply sleeping, dreaming in the ruins, waiting for someone to speak their names again. Not with reverence, but with tenderness. Because what are gods if not stories? And what are stories if not the way we remember who we are? So tonight, we listen. We listen not to learn, but to drift. The whispers come softly, woven through the sound of the sea, through the turning of the stars. They tell of a time when mountains breathed, when rivers spoke, when love and war and wisdom were faces in the clouds. They remind us that everything, even silence, holds a story. And as those whispers fade, the world grows quieter still. Greece and Rome dissolve again into one vast twilight, their myths mingling like smoke above sleeping ruins. The question of who borrowed from whom no longer matters. What matters is the whisper itself, that small, unbroken thread of stories stretching across centuries, still shimmering in the dark. The wind moves on. The stars drift slowly overhead. Somewhere, in the space between dream and memory, the gods smile. Their voices, softer than ever, hum just beneath the edge of hearing, not demanding, not teaching, only being. And in that gentle hum, we find what all stories seek to give us, not answers, but peace. In the quiet realm between reflection and remembrance, there lies a mirror not made of glass, but of story. It hangs in the vastness of time, catching fragments of light from both Greece and Rome, holding them together, letting them shimmer side by side. When you gaze into that mirror, it's difficult to tell where one world ends and the other begins. The faces that look back are both familiar and strange, both ancient and eternal. The gods themselves seem to move between reflections, changing not because they must, but because every mirror tells a slightly different truth. Imagine this mirror floating above the Aegean Sea. On one side, Greece, her shores scattered with marble temples, her language rich with song. On the other, Rome, her roads stretching like veins across a living empire, her heart steady and proud. Between them, the water glitters softly, as though the sea itself remembers the moment when myth first crossed its surface. For myths, like mirrors, never stay still. They move with the light, with the gaze, with the telling. The Greeks, when they dreamed in colors, bright, shifting, filled with the laughter of gods who felt as much as they ruled. Their Olympus was alive with emotion, jealousy, love, anger, longing. The gods quarreled, schemed, wept, celebrated. They were powerful, yes, but also imperfect, and in that imperfection, they reflected humanity. To tell their stories was to hold up a mirror to oneself, to admit that even the divine can be flawed, that beauty and tragedy often walk hand in hand. When Rome came, she stood before that same mirror and saw something different. She admired the light within it, but she also sought to reshape it, to smooth its edges, to steady its reflection. The Romans, practical and disciplined, turned passion into principle, impulse into order. Where the Greeks saw God's whim, the Romans saw divine law. The same stories retold through Roman voices became lessons in structure and virtue. Zeus, wild with thunder, became Jupiter, the father of nations, calm and commanding. Dionysus, the Greek god of ecstasy and freedom, became Bacchus, still joyous, still indulgent, but now bound by ritual, given place and purpose within the Roman order. The mirror of myth did not lie, but it transformed. Each time a story crossed the sea, it rippled, as if touched by a gentle wind. The Greeks painted their gods in the bright chaos of emotion. The Romans cast them in marble, precise, and enduring. And yet, both were true. Both captured something essential, the need to see ourselves reflected in the divine. Perhaps that is why myths endure at all. They are mirrors that never stop showing new faces. Think of Athena, the Greek goddess of wisdom, born from the mind of Zeus in a burst of lightning and thought. She walked with calm grace, carrying both knowledge and compassion. The Romans knew her too, but they called her Minerva. To them, she was the guardian of strategy, of crafts, of order. The difference is subtle, like the shift of light at dusk. One gleams with imagination, the other with structure. Yet both are faces of the same spirit. The mirror simply tilts, and the reflection changes. Or consider Aphrodite, born of sea foam, her beauty both a gift and a curse. The Greeks told of her with tenderness and fear, the way love can heal and destroy in the same breath. The Romans, ever grounded, called her Venus. To them, she was the emblem of grace, a symbol to be honored in statues and songs. The passion of Aphrodite became the poise of Venus, but still, beneath the marble surface, the same heart beat. The mirror shimmered, showing love not as an emotion to be understood, but as a mystery to be revered. There is a kind of peace in recognizing that reflection. Myths do not vanish when retold. They multiply, like echoes across water. Greece and Rome shared a dialogue that never truly ended, a soft conversation carried by art, poetry, architecture, and belief. Sometimes Greece spoke first, and Rome answered. Sometimes Rome whispered back, reshaping the sound. Between them, the mirror of myths stayed clear, catching both the dream and the discipline, the poem and the decree. In the end, it was never about ownership. Myths are not possessions. They are invitations. Each civilization that gazed into that mirror added something new. A word, a gesture, a thought. The reflection deepened. The gods became not only symbols of their people, but of the shared human longing to understand what lies beyond the visible world. As centuries passed, the mirror gathered dust, yet it never lost its light. Travelers walked among the ruins, poets spoke the old names, and somewhere in the night, the reflections stirred again. If you listen closely, you can almost hear them, the echo of sandals on marble, the murmur of prayers rising with the dawn. The gods may have changed their faces, but they never stopped watching, never stopped whispering their stories through the cracks of time. And so, as you drift deeper into stillness, imagine that mirror again. See how it floats between two worlds, Greece and Rome, dream and empire, heart and order. Watch how the reflections shift slowly, gracefully, like the movement of stars across the night sky. There is no rivalry here, only continuity. The stories do not compete. They complete one another. The moonlight deepens, the air cools, the sea murmurs softly against the stones. The mirror fades, but its glow lingers behind your eyes. A quiet shimmer of connection, of remembrance, of timelessness. And as the world around you grows dim, you begin to understand what the gods must have known all along, that every reflection, every borrowed light, is part of the same endless dream. There are moments in the long stretch of human history when beauty seems to drift from one place to another, carried not by armies or kings, but by something lighter, an idea, a feeling, a way of seeing the world. Greece and Rome shared such a passage. Between them, beauty did not stand still. It moved like the tide, taking form, dissolving, reforming again. And tonight, as we sit among shadows and stories, we can almost see that tide washing softly across the centuries. The Greeks believed that beauty was a reflection of harmony, the meeting of proportion and spirit. Their temples, their statues, their myths, all were shaped by this search for balance. When they carved their gods, they carved humanity itself, idealized, yes, but still warm, still alive. Their marble figures were not only bodies, they were breaths, frozen in time, Aphrodite rising from the sea, Apollo with his quiet, distant gaze, Athena poised in stillness, her wisdom wrapped in grace. Each curve, each line, spoke of reverence, not only for the divine, but for the beauty of being alive. Rome saw this, and she listened in her way, not hurried, not careless. Rome had always been a student of what she admired. She did not steal beauty. She studied it, translated it, built upon it. When Greek artists came westward, their craft followed them. The Roman hands that sculpted marble were guided by Greek eyes, yet what emerged was something distinct. The softness of Greek dream became the solidity of Roman presence. The Greek gods seemed to breathe.
Oh.
The Roman gods seemed to endure. Walk, if only in imagination, through a Roman villa in the early morning. The floor beneath you is cool mosaic, a pattern of waves and vines. The walls are painted with soft colors, pale red, faded gold, the occasional glimpse of blue. On the shelf, a small statue of a goddess watches in silence. Her name might be Venus, but her pose is older. It's unmistakably Greek. There's something tender in her face, as if she remembers where she once stood. On a distant shore, beside the sea foam that first gave her life, now she belongs to Rome, yet the beauty that shapes her belongs to both. The borrowing of beauty was never theft. It was a conversation, spoken without words. The Greeks dreamed, and the Romans answered. The language was marble, bronze, architecture, the slow art of permanence. Even the temples spoke to one another. The Parthenon whispered across the centuries to the Pantheon, and though the stones were set by different hands, they both reached upward in the same yearning gesture. To build something perfect, something lasting, us, something that could hold silence and stillness and meaning all at once. That was the shared dream. Perhaps the most beautiful part of this exchange is how natural it seems. There was no line between admiration and creation. A Roman artist could stand before a Greek statue, trace the folds of its robe, and feel not envy, but kinship. In that moment, time would dissolve, chisel would move, and beauty would be reborn, not copied, but continued. It's easy to think of Rome as an imitator, but imitation itself is a form of devotion. To recreate something with care is to love it deeply. The Romans, in their ordered world, preserved the fluid grace of Greek imagination. And in doing so, they saved it from fading. Many of the Greek originals, delicate, fragile, lost to war and weather, survive now only through Roman hands. The mirror of myth became the mirror of art, each reflection keeping the other alive. And so, beauty became a traveler, unhurried, patient, gentle in its persistence. When the gods crossed from Greece to Rome, they did not arrive as conquerors or captives. They arrived as companions. The same sculptors who shaped Jupiter once shaped Zeus. The same brush that painted Venus once painted Aphrodite. In every gesture, there was continuity, a shared faith in form, in presence, in the quiet power of what endures. Sometimes late at night, when museums are dark and still, you can almost imagine the statues breathing again. The moonlight touches their marble faces, and they seem to remember. Somewhere within the quiet, the echo of Greek laughter and Roman prayer mingles in the air. The goddess, who once belonged to the sea, now belongs to eternity. Her name changes with the tongue that speaks it, but her beauty remains the same. Perhaps that is the secret, that beauty, like myth, cannot be owned. It moves where it is remembered, rests where it is cherished. It has no allegiance but to awe itself. Greece carved it from dreams. Rome set it in stone. Together, they built not only gods, but the very idea of timelessness. The Romans, for all their grandeur, knew this too. They understood that beauty was not just for the eye, but for the spirit, a way of touching what cannot be spoken. Their poets wrote of love and loss. Their architects built arches that framed the sky. And somewhere, in all that creation, the Greek muse still whispered. She walked beside them, unseen but always near, guiding their hands, softening their gaze, reminding them that all things, even empires, are temporary, but beauty is eternal. As you drift deeper now, let that idea settle like dust upon ancient stone. Beauty travels, but it never disappears. It changes its accent. It wears a new face, but it never dies. From Greece to Rome, from marble to memory, it continues quiet, patient, luminous. It does not ask who borrowed from whom. It only asks to be seen, even in the dark, even in the hush before sleep. And so, as the world outside your window slows, imagine those ancient statues again, the Greek ones dreaming in fragments, the Roman ones standing guard in the dim light of museums. They are not rivals. They're echoes of one another, two breaths drawn from the same endless song. You can almost hear it now, the low hum of centuries, the murmur of beauty, passing hand to hand, world to world, soul to soul. The gods rest. The artists sleep. The marble cools. And through it all, beauty lingers, unhurried, unchanged, waiting for another dawn to find it again. The night deepens, and with it, the distance between Greece and Rome seems to disappear.
Oh.
The sea that once divided them lies still, as though holding its breath. The air is heavy with the scent of thyme, olive trees and dust, marble and rain. It is here in this long quiet between worlds that we begin to see how the two civilizations did not simply borrow from each other. They blended, slowly, like two shades of twilight, merging until only one remains. It happened not through conquest or decree, but through something more delicate, the soft erosion of difference. Soldiers marched, traders sailed, poets wandered, and in their movements, ideas flowed. A Greek sculptor might carve in a Roman courtyard. A Roman priest might whisper a Greek prayer beneath his breath. Over time, the languages tangled, the names intertwined, and the myths began to share a single pulse. You can imagine it. A small market in a port town, somewhere along the coast of the Adriatic. The sun hangs low, turning the stone walls golden. In one corner, an old storyteller speaks to a crowd of children. He begins in Greek, his words smooth and lyrical. But as he continues, a few Roman words slip in, unnoticed. The children don't seem to mind. They laugh, they listen, they drift into the rhythm of his tale. By the end, it's no longer clear whose story he's telling. Perhaps it was never meant to be clear. The blending of worlds was quiet like that, a merging of breath, of habit, of imagination. The Romans did not erase Greek myth. They adopted it, adapted it, allowed it to settle into their daily lives. The gods who once stood atop Olympus now walked the Roman streets. They presided over marriages and harvests, guarded the hearth, watched over the army. They became local, approachable, woven into the rituals of empire. And yet, beneath the Roman names, the Greek spirits lingered, smiling faintly from behind the mask. It was not only religion that blended, but identity. The Greeks, long before Rome's rise, had already taught the world how to think about the divine, not as distant, perfect beings, but as mirrors of human longing. The Romans took that mirror and turned it slightly, so that the reflection showed both heaven and empire. In Roman hands, myth became history and symbol. The gods were no longer only stories. They were principles woven into the moral fabric of the state. Yet still, somewhere beneath the marble of order, the shimmer of Greek dream remained. In art, in poetry, in philosophy, this merging became almost seamless. Virgil's verses echo Homer's music. Ovid's stories breathe the same rhythm as Hesiod's. Even the gods themselves seem to forget where they had begun. Venus might remember Aphrodite's laughter. Mars might recall Ares' fire. But in the Roman telling, they became something slightly different, shaped by duty, touched by discipline, steadied by law. The wild heart of Greece was tamed, not silenced. It was refined, given new language, new form. Yet, for all the changes, there was harmony. The Greeks had dreamed of beauty. The Romans built it. The Greeks had spoken of gods. The Romans gave them temples. The Greeks had written poetry about the stars. The Romans charted the heavens. One imagined, the other realized, and together they made something that still hums through the corridors of time. When you walk through the ruins today, whether in Athens or Rome, that blending is everywhere. A broken column carved in Greek style rests beneath a Roman arch. A statue once Greek in spirit wears Roman robes. Even the air feels mixed, the warmth of one world resting gently over the bones of another. It's as if time itself decided to fold the two civilizations together, preserving them not separately, but as one vast dream. There's a strange comfort in that. It's the idea that greatness doesn't vanish when it's absorbed, it evolves. Greece taught Rome to imagine, and Rome taught Greece to endure. Together they created something larger than either could have done alone. Their myths became a single chorus, sung in two voices that harmonize across millennia. And somewhere in that harmony, you can almost hear the faint music of recognition, the gods nodding to one another across time. Minerva to Athena, Jupiter to Zeus, Venus to Aphrodite. They do not compete. They coexist, sharing the same eternal light. The same stories that once flickered by candlelight in Athens would one they be recited in Roman courtyards under the same moon? The blending of worlds teaches us something simple, something quietly profound, that identity is not lost in sharing. When one culture meets another, both are changed, not diminished, but deepened. Just as twilight holds both day and night, Greece and Rome became two shades of one ancient truth, that human beings, no matter the language or the century, are always trying to make sense of wonder. As the night deepens, imagine standing at the edge of that ancient sea again. The stars are reflected in the water, shimmering like scattered gold. You can no longer tell which reflection belongs to Greece and which to Rome. The waves move softly, and for a moment, it seems the whole world is breathing as one. The myths, the memories, the ruins, the dreams. The gods sleep quietly beneath the stars. The temples, half broken, gleamed faintly in the moonlight. Somewhere, an old story is still being told, though no one remembers who spoke the first word. And in that forgetting there is peace, a peace born from blending, from belonging, from the gentle understanding that all stories eventually become one. Time, like the tide, never stops moving, but it has a way of carrying certain sounds farther than others. The stories of Greece and Rome, whispered long ago beside firelight and beneath temple domes, continue to drift through the centuries, softened but never silenced. You can almost hear them faintly, like the hum of the sea against stone. They echo not because they are loud, but because they were told with such quiet certainty. The belief that the gods were listening, that the stars cared, that meaning could be found in the smallest gesture of the divine. As empires rose and fell, the old myths survived, not as memories of power, but as fragments of wonder. The Romans had taken the Greek stories and given them structure, order, purpose, but time, as it often does, untied those threads. What remained were not systems of belief, but gentle echoes of Aphrodite's laughter, of Jupiter's thunder, of a world where every stream had a spirit and every wind a will. These echoes found new homes, new voices. In the monasteries of the Middle Ages, monks copying ancient texts would pause, brush their fingers across a margin, and smile faintly at the mention of Zeus or Apollo. They no longer worshipped these figures, but still, something in the name stirred the imagination, a reminder of the world before silence, before certainty. The gods, though unworshipped, were never forgotten. They lived quietly in the corners of memory, sleeping, but not gone. Later, during the Renaissance, those echoes began to awaken. Artists and poets opened old books and found the ancient voices still warm within them. Botticelli painted Venus rising from the sea, not as a goddess of ritual, but as a symbol of beauty itself, reborn through brush and color. Michelangelo carved forms that might have walked through Greek myths. And poets, from Petrarch to Shakespeare, found in these old stories a way to speak of longing, of pride, of the fragile glory of being human. Each retelling was a translation, not just of words but of feeling. The Greeks saw the divine in beauty, the Roman in virtue, the Renaissance in expression. And so the myths changed again, reshaped not by conquest, but by curiosity. Every era seemed to see itself in the stories, to borrow them, to bend them, to let them speak anew. That is perhaps the greatest secret of mythology. It does not belong to one people or one time. It moves, endlessly adaptable, breathing through every generation that dares to dream. Imagine sitting in a library at dusk, the air still, the light fading to gold. Shelves stretch endlessly, filled with books that whisper faintly when you walk past. Somewhere, a page rustles open. A name you've heard before seems to glow faintly from the paper. Hera, Apollo, Athena. You pause. Not because you believe, but because something ancient stirs in the sound of it. Those names are more than history, they're echoes of imagination, remnants of a time when people believed that stories could shape the world. Even in the modern world, their presence lingers in small, almost invisible ways. We call planets by their Roman names, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, as if the old gods now drift through space instead of on Mount Olympus. The days of the week still whisper of Saturn, of Mercury. The months recall Janus and Juno. The very calendar, the rhythm of time itself, carries their signatures. The old myths did not fade. It transformed into the quiet patterns of daily life, unnoticed but unforgotten. And when we tell stories now in books and films and quiet thoughts before sleep, the same structures remain. The hero's journey, the fall from grace, the quest for love or redemption. These are not inventions of the present, but continuations of ancient voices. The echoes of Greece and Rome move through us, whether we realize it or not. They hum beneath every narrative we tell, every dream we chase. There is something soothing in that, the thought that we are never truly apart from the past. When you watch a film about a lonely hero, when you read a novel about beauty and loss, you are brushing fingertips against myths thousands of years old. They persist not because they are divine, but because they are human. They reflect our constant search for meaning, the same search that once drove the Greeks to name their constellations and the Romans to dedicate their temples. Perhaps that is what myths have always been, not answers, but echoes. They do not explain the world. They help us feel it. They give shape to mystery, turning fear into story, chaos into pattern. The Greeks gave those patterns grace. The Romans gave them endurance. Together, they created something that could last not merely through centuries, but through civilizations. And as you listen to their faint resonance tonight, there is a kind of calm in knowing that the stories never stop traveling. They have moved through parchment and marble, through ink and breath, through the silence between words. Even now, in this moment, as you drift between thought and sleep, those ancient voices are still whispering softly somewhere in the dark. The myths echo not in the heavens, but in the quiet corners of the human mind, where wonder lives, where longing breathes, where the oldest part of us still listens for the sound of gods walking the earth. You might imagine them not as distant beings, but as memories, drifting through dreams like a faint melody. And if you listen closely, perhaps you'll hear it. The same question that has moved through all of time: who borrowed from whom? Was it Greece who taught Rome to dream? Or Rome who taught Greece to endure? Or perhaps, as the echoes suggest, it was neither and both. Perhaps every civilization, every heart that tells a story, is borrowing from the same ancient silence, reshaping it into words, giving it meaning once again. In that silence, the gods rest peacefully. Their temples crumble, but their voices remain. The marble cools, the torches dim, and the world moves on. But the myths, like soft music, continue. They are not gone. They are simply quieter now, content to hum beneath the noise of the modern world. And maybe that's where they belong. Not on Olympus, not in Rome, but in the soft stillness between waking and sleep. In the breath before a story begins, the pause before memory fades. Night lingers over the ruins. The world has quieted into that rare stillness where even the air seems to listen. Stones that once formed temples now lie soft beneath moss, their carvings blurred by time. The stars above glimmer faintly, the same constellations that once held the stories of Zeus and Hera, of Venus and Mars. And yet, the silence feels deeper now, as if the gods themselves have settled into sleep. There's a kind of peace in this fading. Once, their names were spoken with reverence and fear. Now they drift like echoes through memory. It is not a loss, but a release. The gentle way the world exhales when a long story finally ends. The myths have done their work. They shaped minds, guided hearts, inspired beauty. Now they rest. Still, if you stand in the ruins long enough, you might feel something stir. Not a voice, not a presence, but a pulse. The faint rhythm of all that once was. You could call it memory, or imagination, or simply the human wish that something so grand could never truly vanish. The stones remember. The air remembers. The stories have sunk so deeply into the world that they've become part of its quiet breathing. The gods were not defeated by time. They simply changed shape. You can see them in the flicker of light across water, in the curve of a statue's shoulder, in the sigh of wind through the cypress trees. Perhaps they have always been this, not beings to be worshipped, but feelings to be recognized. Love, pride, jealousy, the very emotions that once gave the gods their form are still here, alive in every heart that beats. Rome fell, and Greece before it. Yet the myths continued to drift, invisible and intact. They found shelter in art, in poetry, in the quiet dream of humankind to touch something greater than itself. Every generation rediscovers them, not in temples or rituals, but in stories, symbols, moments of wonder. They survive because they are not about gods at all, but about us. You might close your eyes now and picture that final moment, the last torch burning in a forgotten Roman temple. The priest is gone, the night is still. The flame flickers once, twice, and then fades. For a breath, there is darkness. And then slowly, the moonlight fills the space where the flame once danced. The gods in that moment do not die. They dissolve into light, into silence, into the long, endless rhythm of time. That is the true secret behind who borrowed from whom. Greece and Rome shared not a theft, but a transformation. The Greeks gave the world dreams. The Romans gave those dreams endurance. And we, all these centuries later, are still living within that quiet exchange. Every story told, every name remembered, every act of imagination is a small echo of their ancient conversation. The night deepens, but it does not end. Somewhere in the distance, a new dawn is forming, unseen, inevitable. The myths wait for it patiently as they always have. Because even as ages turn, humanity still looks up to the same stars, still wonders about the same questions, still searches for meaning in the stillness of the world. When morning comes, the ruins will glow again. The light will touch the worn marble, the broken columns, the faint outlines of what once was. The gods will remain asleep, but their presence will linger, soft, unseen, eternal. And the stories, those quiet bridges between time and thought, will continue to hum beneath the surface of the world. Rest now with them. Let the old stories fade into the rhythm of your breath. Let the last light of the gods fall softly on your thoughts. They are not gone. They are only quieter now, like dreams waiting for you on the edge of sleep. The air in the gallery feels cooler than the world outside, the kind of cool that smells faintly of dust and stillness. You could imagine it being the same air that once drifted through the temples of ancient Rome or the quiet hills of Greece. The marble statues stand motionless beneath the dim light, their faces serene, their eyes hollow and pale, and yet in their silence they seem to breathe. Each one tells a story, though the stories have long since blurred together. A hand raised toward the sky, perhaps a plea, perhaps a farewell. A half-broken face, the lips parted as if about to speak. A figure reclining, carved in the soft weightlessness of eternity. These are not just works of art. They are remnants of belief, fragments of a world where stone was asked to remember what human hearts could not. You stand before one of them, and for a moment, you forget where you are. The centuries collapse like a sigh. The marble, cool and lifeless, begins to glow faintly in your imagination. You can almost see the hands that shaped it, Greek hands, perhaps working with quiet devotion, then Roman hands, copying, adapting, giving it new meaning for a different world. Between them lies the invisible conversation of history, the Greek sculptor carving the divine in ideal form, the Roman patron commissioning it for his villa, hoping to capture a piece of the sacred for himself. The myths beneath the marble are still alive, though they no longer speak in words. They linger in posture, in balance, in the careful tilt of a head or the weight of a cloak. The Greeks once carved gods to embody beauty. The Romans carved beauty to embody power, but beneath both, the same human longing to preserve what cannot last pulses like a heartbeat under stone. You might walk down the long corridor and imagine each statue whispering its own quiet memory. One recalls a time when it stood beneath open sky, the sunlight warming its surface, the prayers of strangers echoing around it. Another remembers the slow passage of war and empire carried away from its home, placed in a courtyard far from the sea. And yet another, faceless, broken, remembers nothing but the sound of footsteps and the feeling of being looked upon. That is what marble holds best, the memory of being seen. Long after the names have faded, the myths survive in that silent exchange between the gaze and the stone. You look, and it looks back, not with eyes, but with presence. You are both mirrors, each reflecting the other's attempt to hold time still. The blending of Greek and Roman myth lives most quietly here, in the calm surface of sculpture. When the Romans took the gods of Greece, they took their images too, not as theft, but as admiration made permanent. They built their temples in Greek proportions, sculpted their deities in Greek forms, The marble of Rome was carved in the language of Athens, and so each statue became a kind of translation, one that no longer belonged to a single world, but to the timeless echo of both. You could trace your fingers along the folds of a robe, smooth where countless others have touched it. Somewhere beneath your fingertips lies the intention of the sculptor, a moment frozen. The chisel marks hidden beneath polish, the breath caught in a figure's stillness. Even now it feels alive, not moving, but never quite still. It's the same way memory moves quietly within us, shifting when we are not looking. The myths beneath marble have learned patience. They have watched centuries pass like shadows across their surfaces. Empires fell, languages changed, beliefs faded, but the statues remained. They waited, as they always do, for someone to stand before them and listen, not with ears, but with the slow awareness that stories never really die. It's strange, isn't it? How stillness can hold so much motion, how silence can hum louder than sound. You can feel it here in the weight of the air, in the echo of your footsteps against the floor. The gods no longer command, no longer punish or bless. They simply exist, serene and unbothered, as if having transcended belief itself. Somewhere far back in the past, a Greek artist sculpted the god Apollo with the grace of youth, light, proportion, perfection. Centuries later, a Roman artisan copied that same form, but in doing so, gave it a new soul. The Greek Apollo sang of divine beauty. The Roman Apollo spoke of empire and order, yet in marble, both versions became something beyond either pure stillness. That stillness is what endures. When we look at them now, we no longer see gods or nations, but something universal, the quiet dignity of form, the humility of time. The myths no longer need to be told. They have been carved into the very language of art. They are the pause between stories, the breath after creation, the calm that follows awe. Sometimes late in the evening, when the museum lights dim and the visitors have gone, you can almost imagine the statues relaxing slightly, the tension of centuries easing from their limbs. The gods, long freed from their altars, rest in the soft light of memory. No one prays to them anymore, and yet they seem content. Perhaps this is what they were always meant to become, not objects of worship, but companions to silence. And if you listen closely, you might hear the faintest murmur in the stillness, the sound of marble remembering sunlight, of myth remembering voice. It's not sorrow you feel, but peace, the kind that comes when something ancient has found its rest. The Greeks and Romans once believed that to forget the gods was to lose divine favor. But time has shown something gentler, that to forget is not always to erase. Sometimes, forgetting is a way of transforming, of allowing stories to live quietly, unseen, but not gone. The gods, now made of stone and memory, have become part of the earth again. They are not absent, they have simply become landscape. So when you stand before a statue in a gallery or a ruin, or even just in your imagination, you are standing in that space between worlds. It's a space where myth becomes matter and matter becomes meaning. The space where Greece and Rome still whisper to one another through marble. And perhaps that's all mythology ever was. A conversation between silence and form, between dream and stone. As the light fades from the gallery and the world outside darkens into evening, the marble grows colder, the air stiller. You take one last look, and for a moment, you could almost believe that the statue moves. Not outwardly, but inwardly, as if the myth inside it turns in its sleep. You leave quietly, and the sound of your footsteps fades. Behind you, the statues remain eternal and unhurried, keeping watch over the fragments of stories that time itself has forgotten how to tell. The myths beneath marble do not ask to be remembered. They simply are. And in their stillness, they remind us that every story, no matter how ancient, is still waiting to be seen. There's a kind of silence that only exists among ruins, not the empty kind, but the full kind, heavy with memory. When you walk among the remains of an ancient temple, the air feels thick, as though holding something too delicate to release. Stones lean toward one another like tired storytellers. Pillars rise only halfway, reaching for a sky that no longer belongs to them. And yet, in this decay, something still breathes. Faint, invisible, but alive. The gods are here still, though not in the ways they once were. They no longer stand on pedestals or demand prayers. They exist in the dust that settles on broken marble and the faint scent of sun-warmed stone. You can feel them in the hush between footsteps, in the shadow of a column that has forgotten its purpose but not its grace. They are quieter now, no longer gods of thunder or love or war, but gods of endurance. A ruin has its own kind of divinity. It teaches the same lesson that myths once did, that nothing lasts forever, and yet nothing is truly lost. The Greeks built temples for beauty. The Romans built them for power. Both stand now as whispers, the edges of their carvings worn smooth by centuries of wind. But if you close your eyes, you can still imagine the sound of their voices, priests chanting, citizens murmuring, torches flickering in the dark. Those sounds have turned to dust, and the dust has become part of the air we breathe. Somewhere, in a forgotten field overgrown with grass, the stones of an old Roman villa lie scattered. The outlines of the walls are faint, but if you stand there long enough, your imagination fills in the rest, the laughter, the footsteps, the soft rustle of linen. Perhaps there was once a small statue in the courtyard, Venus, maybe, or Apollo, gazing upward, as though listening to music only marble could hear. Now it lies face down in the soil, the features worn smooth. But even in its erosion, it remains something sacred. The gods have not vanished. They have simply changed their address. Once worshipped in marble halls, now they dwell in shadow, in cracks, in corners, in the soft hum of time. They have become ghosts of themselves, but not mournful ones. There is a serenity in their fading, a grace in their surrender. The Greeks dreamed of immortality, the Romans built for eternity, yet both learned in the end that even the eternal must rest. The dust that covers these ruins is not ordinary. It is history ground fine, the ashes of belief, the breath of ages. When the wind stirs it, it rises softly, as if carrying with it the faintest whispers of the past. Perhaps it is memory itself, refusing to stay still. And as the sun begins to set, the ruins seem to come alive again, shadows stretching long, light pooling in the broken spaces where gods once stood. There is something oddly human about ruins. They mirror the fragility of our own lives, proud structures undone by time, yet still beautiful in their imperfection. The Greeks and Romans built as though their empires would never fall. And yet, here they are, reduced to dust and shadow. Still, in that very ruin lies a kind of immortality, not the one they imagined, but one that time itself grants to those who leave a mark, even if it's only a faint one. If you listen closely, you might hear the soft hum of life returning. Grass growing between cracks. Birds nesting in fallen stone. The world has reclaimed what was once divine. The ruins no longer belong to gods or men, but to the earth itself. It accepts them gently, covering them in quiet patience. Sometimes travelers come walking slowly, their voices hushed, as if afraid to disturb something sleeping. They trace their fingers over inscriptions whose meanings are long forgotten, their footsteps stirring the same dust that once fell across the sandals of priests. In their silence there is reverence not for religion but for memory, for the idea that something can endure, even in pieces. As twilight falls, the shadows grow longer, deeper. The air cools, and the ruins take on a strange glow, as if lit from within. Perhaps it's imagination, or perhaps the last light of the gods still lingers, scattered among the stones. The myths that once filled these places with laughter, fear, and devotion have turned into something softer now, something almost like a lullaby. You can almost hear it, the faint rhythm of centuries breathing in and out. The gods hum through the wind, through the slow rustle of leaves, through the echo of footsteps long gone. Their power has become tenderness. Their wrath has turned to patience. They're no longer creators or destroyers, they are witnesses. And maybe that is their final transformation. From gods of command to gods of memory. From ruling the world to resting within it. The Greeks imagined their gods on mountains. The Romans placed them in temples. But time, indifferent in kind, has placed them everywhere in stone and dust, in thought and dream. When night finally settles over the ruins, the world becomes very still. The stars come out, the same ones that once looked down on Rome and Athens. You could almost believe they are watching still, tracing familiar constellations, spring the old names to themselves. Jupiter, Aphrodite, Mars, Athena. Not forgotten, just quieter, like an old song hummed under one's breath.
Ow.
The dusk cools, the air softens, and the shadows deepen. The gods, sleeping beneath their broken temples, no longer need to be seen to exist. They live now in the imagination, in the gentle acceptance that even ruin has beauty, that even endings have grace. And as you walk away, your footsteps leaving faint marks in the dust, the ruins remain unchanging, unhurried. Somewhere in their silence, the gods breathe. Somewhere in their stillness, the myths continue, softer than before, but endless. Perhaps they always belonged here, not in triumph or worship, but in dust and shadow. There comes a moment, sometime between waking and sleep, when everything becomes a little blurred around the edges. The mind loosens its grip on names, on years, on the places we have been. The ordinary world begins to dissolve like ink in water, and in that half-light, when consciousness drifts and the body rests, another world stirs, one made of memory, silence, and dream. It is here, in this soft in-between, that the forgotten temples of the gods still stand. Not in stone or marble, but in imagination. They rise behind closed eyes, faint shapes made of thought and dust, glowing softly in the dark. They are not built by hands anymore, but by remembrance. You might find yourself walking through one without realizing it. A hallway that stretches longer than it should. A light that flickers like fire from 1,000 years ago. The sound of sandals echoing, though your feet are bare. These are the remnants of divine architecture, surviving only in dream. The Greeks once said that dreams were the messages of the gods. The Romans agreed, but they made the gods more distant, less personal, more ceremonial. Still, both believed that sleep opened a door, one that ordinary waking could not. Through that door came whispers, warnings, comforts, and sometimes nothing but silence, which was often the most divine of all. When the temples fell, when the statues cracked, and the altars grew cold, the gods did not vanish. They sank quietly into the folds of human thought. They became the architecture of imagination, columns made of curiosity, arches carved from longing. Every time someone wondered about the stars or the sea or the shape of fate, a new temple was built, invisible but real. And so as you lie still, drifting in the dark, imagine one now, a vast quiet hall, lit only by a soft, eternal dusk. The floor is smooth and cold beneath your feet. The air hums faintly, as if holding a breath it never releases. Somewhere far ahead, a fountain murmurs, its water moving in slow, circular rhythm. Each sound echoes like the heartbeat of the world itself. Along the walls stand statues that you cannot quite see, shapes you half recognize but can name. One might be Athena, her owl perched silently nearby. Another could be Mars, his armor forgotten, his hands folded in stillness. They are peaceful now, stripped of thunder and battle. Even the mighty Jupiter seems smaller here, his lightning reduced to the faintest shimmer that dances like a memory along the walls. You walk slowly. There is no rush. The temple seems endless, but you don't mind. With every step, you feel time stretching, softening. You realize this is not a place of worship anymore. It's a place of rest. The gods are no longer waiting for prayers. They are sleeping, and you are walking through their dreams. Somewhere, a door opens, or maybe it's just the sound of your own breathing. You step through into another chamber, one filled with dim light and drifting dust. The air smells faintly of rain and stone. On a pedestal at the center stands something small, a bowl of oil, its flame flickering. This, perhaps, is all that remains of ancient devotion, a single, quiet light, trembling but unextinguished. If you were to touch it, you would feel warmth, not heat, just the gentle warmth of endurance, the same warmth that has kept myths alive for thousands of years. Stories may have changed, the names may have shifted, Zeus to Jupiter, Hermes to Mercury, Aphrodite to Venus, but the flame remained. It passed quietly from one hand to another, from one century to the next, and it still burns now, though we call it imagination, or memory, or art. You sit beside the flame. The silence feels endless, but not empty. It is full of all the moments that have ever been, a soft gathering of everything that once mattered. Somewhere in that silence, you sense the weight of history, the breath of every storyteller, whoever whispered a myth to the dark. Their voices linger, faint and kind, like the sound of leaves moving in the night breeze. Perhaps that's what the gods have become. Not figures, not powers, but echoes. They exist in stories, in symbols, in the quiet persistence of the human desire to understand what cannot be seen. In that way, the Greeks and Romans did not so much create their gods as reveal them reflections of their own hearts and fears, cast into the sky and carved into stone. And when the stones fell, those reflections returned to where they began, within. Now, centuries later, the temples of dream are what remain. We carry them with us, each of us building them anew each night, sometimes without realizing it. A flicker of lightning across closed eyes becomes Zeus remembering himself. A soft wind at midnight might be Hermes passing through, still wandering, still curious. The ripple of water in a dream could be Poseidon, stirring faintly, watching the shorelines of sleep. They are not gods in the old sense. They are metaphors now. Gentle companions to thought, the language of wonder wearing old names. They remind us of something ancient in ourselves, that even when the world grows quiet, imagination continues to move, endlessly building, endlessly dreaming. Some dreams crumble, others stay. And when morning comes, we wake with traces of them clinging to our thoughts, symbols we don't quite understand, feelings that linger just out of reach. The gods of sleep are subtle that way. They do not demand recognition. They only wish to be remembered, even if faintly, even if only as shadows. Inside the world continues, the same stars shining over different empires, the same moon watching new cities rise and fall. But inside, in that secret architecture of the mind, the old gods walk slowly, endlessly. They wander through the corridors of imagination, brushing their fingers across the walls, leaving faint trails of light wherever they pass. You might feel them when you can quite sleep, the feeling that something ancient and kind is sitting nearby, saying nothing, simply waiting, not to be prayed to, but to be felt. Not to command, but to accompany. That, perhaps, is what remains of Olympus in Rome, not temples or rituals, but presence, a quiet, enduring sense that there is more to existence than what we can measure. And so, when you drift off tonight, think of the forgotten temples of dream. Think of their endless corridors and their sleeping statues. Think of the flame that never quite goes out. Think of the gods who no longer ask to be believed in, only to be remembered softly, wordlessly, in the stillness between breaths. The temple fades, the light dims. The sound of the fountain grows distant. You lie down on the cool stone floor, feeling the gentle hum beneath you, the hum of time, of memory, of the stories that built this invisible place. The gods rest. You rest. And for a while there is no difference between the two. The walls dissolve into darkness. The floor becomes cloud. The air fills with a warmth that feels like peace. Somewhere faintly, a voice not in words but in feeling says, "We are still here." You drift deeper. The temple folds around you like night. The flame flickers once, twice, and then becomes a star. And that star becomes your dream. When the sun has gone down and the streets grow still, the city begins to remember itself. Beneath the rhythm of lights and engines, beneath the conversations that fade into doorways and stairwells, there lies another sound, a quieter pulse, deeper and older. It is the sound of all that came before, breathing faintly beneath the concrete. Every city has layers, though we seldom think about them. Beneath the pavements are older streets. Beneath those streets are foundations of forgotten temples. And beneath them still lie the bones of older worlds. Brick, ash, clay, myth. Each era built upon the other like sediment, until what was once sacred became part of the everyday ground we walk upon. And though time has covered it all, the echoes remain. In Rome, they say the stones still speak. Tourists walk above them, cameras flashing. But if you listen carefully at night, truly listen, you can almost hear the murmur of forgotten prayers, the faint rhythm of sandals on marble floors, long since buried. The city dreams of itself, replaying its ancient heartbeat under the hum of modern life. And in that dreaming, the old gods still wander, not in shining armor or golden robes, but as shadows passing between lamplight and dust. Mars walks unseen along the river, his sword long forgotten, his reflection broken by the current. Venus drifts through alleyways, scented with rain and exhaust, her beauty softened by time, her eyes full of distant stars. Jupiter sits somewhere high, perhaps on a rooftop, gazing at the electric constellations humans have made in place of his own. Even in cities far from Rome, the gods have learned to adapt. They are patient, these old presences. They do not rage against their obscurity, understand the long rhythm of things, that everything rises and falls, is forgotten and found again. The Greeks once imagined that their gods lived on Mount Olympus, high above the world. But now, perhaps Olympus has descended, spread thin through every city, every shadow, every quiet space that humans create when they stop to think or dream. In Athens, there is a streetwear at certain hours. The wind carries the scent of olive trees, though none grow nearby. Locals say it is the breath of Athena herself, reminding the city who first gave it its name. In Istanbul, beneath Hagia Sophia, marble columns once dedicated to Roman emperors now stand silent, carrying the whispers of both gods and saints. And in Paris, beneath its glittering lights, old stones taken from Roman ruins still form the basements of buildings, the foundations of forgotten worship holding up cafes and apartments. It is strange to think that we live every day above such layers of memory. Beneath each step lies centuries of stories of worship and war, of silence and song. If you close your eyes and imagine the ground beneath you becoming transparent, you might see them. Statues half buried, inscriptions fading, coins resting in darkness, all the quiet debris of belief. But perhaps the gods no longer dwell in marble or myth. Perhaps they now live in the small things, in the rhythm of footsteps on cobblestone, in the soft hum of electricity through the walls, and the way people still look up at the sky when the moon is full. The divine has always adapted, wearing whatever form the world gives it. So, maybe, Apollo now lives in a musician who plays alone in a subway tunnel at night, his voice echoing like prayer. Perhaps Hermes rides through the streets on a bicycle, weaving through traffic, carrying news and forgotten messages. Maybe Dionysus waits behind the laughter spilling from late-night cafes, where strangers toast to nothing in particular. These are not gods in any old sense. They're remnants, fragments of imagination, still pulsing gently in the human spirit. Once, they were worshipped. Now, they are remembered, faintly, unknowingly. Every time someone gazes into a sunset and feels something unnameable, every time someone speaks to the night as if it were listening every time. Someone makes art out of longing. That is where the old gods breathe again. Rome borrowed from Greece. Greece borrowed from the winds and waters of older worlds still. And now, we borrow from them, not consciously, but through inheritance. Our stories became our metaphors, their myths our subconscious language. We say someone has the Midas touch, or that something is Herculean. We speak of Pandora's curiosity, of Achilles' weakness, of a Trojan horse in our computers. We carry the gods in our words without realizing it, whispering them into existence 1,000 times a day. In that sense, mythology never truly dies. It simply changes its address. Once it lived in temples, now it lives in language. Once it was carved into marble, now it's woven into thought. The gods of Olympus and Rome were not defeated by time, they were absorbed, diffused into the bloodstream of culture until belief itself became unnecessary. They became symbols, ideas, habits of thought, quiet companions to the mind. Imagine for a moment that the city itself dreams, streets, its bridges, its buildings, all breathing slowly as night falls. The lights blink like constellations, cars move like comets. Deep below where the ancient foundations lie, the stones stir faintly, remembering. The echoes of chisel marks, the faint trace of a footstep from 2,000 years ago. The ghost of a hymn sung in Latin or Greek, all these things ripple through the night, like small waves of memory. Somewhere beneath all of it, a god might still be sleeping. Perhaps a forgotten river spirit lies curled beneath the subways, listening to the rush of trains as though they were the voices of his ancient waters. Perhaps a small household goddess, once adored by a family long vanished, sits in darkness beneath an apartment, her clay face cracked, but her presence calm. These quiet remnants do not ask to be found. They are content in their invisibility. They have learned the art of endurance. If you listen closely, you can almost feel it, that faint pulse beneath everything. The sound of myth breathing through modernity. The old stories did not end when belief did. They simply began to dream within us instead. The gods became thoughts, and thoughts became cities, and cities became their temples. Each skyscraper a pillar, each streetlight a flame, each sleeping mind a sanctuary. As the night deepens, the city grows quiet again. The streets empty. The windows darken one by one. Somewhere a cat walks across a courtyard that was once a forum. Somewhere else a breeze moves through an alley that follows the curve of an ancient road. The world above sleeps, and the world below remembers.
Yeah.
You too are part of that remembering. As you lie still, the rhythm of your breath matching the quiet pulse beneath the city, you are not separate from it. You are walking in the same myth that carried those who came before, the same rhythm, same night, the same endless cycle of creation and forgetting. The gods beneath the city are not gone, they are waiting, patient as stone, for us to notice the small miracles still hidden in the ordinary. If you were to dream of them tonight, they would not appear as they once did, not with thunder or crowns or spears. They would come softly in the shape of light moving across water, in the sound of footsteps echoing down an empty street. They would speak not in words, but in feelings, a sense of calm, of memory, of something larger and older than yourself. As you drift, the city above and the city below merge. The lights become stars again. The noise becomes wind. You're both ancient and new, both sleeping and awake. The gods rest beneath you, dreaming of marble halls and warm sunlight, and you dream above them, carried by their endless hum. In the end, that may be what it means to live in their shadow, to remember without trying, to belong to a story that never needed to be told. The myths were never about gods alone, they were about us. The longing that built cities, it's the imagination that carved faces from stone, the quiet hope that meaning might still be hiding somewhere in the dark. So sleep now, city of lights and echoes. Sleep, dreamer walking above the buried past. The gods are still here, softer, quieter, but here. They wait in the hush of midnight, in the breath of wind through windows, in the pulse of every dream that begins with silence. The gods beneath the city do not need temples anymore. They have found their home in the rhythm of your heart, in the flicker of your thoughts, as you drift deeper into the long, gentle sleep of time. There is a rhythm to the sea that never truly stops. Even when the wind is still and the horizon lies flat and silver, the water moves with a quiet persistence, an eternal breath drawn by the world itself. The Greeks once believed that every wave was the gesture of a god, and the Romans agreed, though they gave the waters new names, reshaped the currents in their own stories. Between these two lands of marble and myth lay an ocean that was not a boundary, but a bridge. If you close your eyes, you can almost see it. The Aegean, the Ionian, the Tyrrhenian waters that shimmer under a sun so ancient that its light seems tired. Tiny boats drift across it, their sails soft as whispers, their destinations blurred by distance. On one shore, a poet murmurs the name of Poseidon, calling upon him for calm. On another, a Roman sailor mutters Neptune, asking the same favor. The words are different, but the prayer is the same. The ocean, indifferent and endless, listens to both. Long before the empires rose, the sea was already old. It carried voices, myths, and offerings, long before borders were drawn. Fishermen told stories of strange lights below the surface, of voices calling from the deep. Traders brought back tales of islands where gods still walked, of storms that spoke in tongues no one could understand. Each story, carried home like salt clinging to skin, added another grain to the vast mosaic of mythology. When Greece looked westward and Rome looked eastward, they saw reflections of themselves shimmering on the water. The Romans saw beauty, wisdom, and art flowing from Greece, and they reached out across the sea to gather it, to bring it home, to call it their own. But the sea did not care for ownership. The waves mingled freely, blending stories like pigments in a painter's bowl. A Greek myth would drift across, and by the time it reached Italian shores, it had changed, not stolen, not copied, but transformed by distance, by language, by the dreams of those who received it. The gods themselves seemed to travel with the tides. Aphrodite became Venus, her laughter carried by the sound of foam against the shore. Ares became Mars, his temper softened by the Roman air. Zeus turned into Jupiter, his thunder echoing differently over the hills of Latium. It was as though the gods, too, were sailing, wearing new names like garments, adapting to new lands, yet remaining unmistakably themselves. There is something deeply soothing about imagining these myths not as possessions, but as currents, endlessly flowing, merging, reshaping. It is the nature of stories to move. They are like water. They find their way into every crack of the human heart. They fill every silence. They reflect whatever light we shine upon them. The Greeks may have built the fountain, but the Romans let it overflow. And even now, if you stand by the sea and listen long enough, you can almost hear the old voices beneath the modern noise. The chanting of sailors, the hum of oars, the soft murmur of prayer. The same rhythm that once rocked ships carrying amphorae of wine now carries our thoughts, our dreams, our restless longing to connect with what has been lost. The ocean is not just a body of water, it is a body of memory. Every wave that touches the shore has touched another before it. The salt in the water is the same salt that stung the eyes of sailors who once whispered myths to the wind. Perhaps that is why the sea feels so familiar when we look at it, as though it has known us for longer than we can remember. Imagine a night long ago. The moon is full, painting a road of light across the waves. A small boat drifts in the middle of the Aegean. A lone man wrapped in a cloak leans over the side and whispers to the sea. He speaks to no one and everyone. He speaks to the gods, but also to the silence that follows them. He tells a story of love, of war, of transformation. The words disappear into the wind, but the sea remembers. It carries the story across the water, letting it echo, letting it change. Somewhere far away, a Roman fisherman wakes from a dream he doesn't understand, a dream that feels borrowed, as if the sea itself whispered it into his ear. This is how myths traveled, not on scrolls or in books, but in dreams, in songs, in the hush between waves. They drifted from mouth to mouth, from harbor to harbor, never asking for permission, never needing to explain themselves. Every retelling was a translation, not just of language, but of feeling. Each culture took what it needed, a symbol, a name, a gesture, and made it its own. It is comforting to think of the sea as the true storyteller, patient, impartial, infinite. It connects without dividing, carries without keeping. Its waves are both memory and renewal, washing away and returning again. In that way, it is the perfect mirror for myth itself. Stories, like tides, never stay still. They ebb and flow, vanish and reappear, always the same and never the same. The Romans built ships and armies to conquer, but what they truly inherited from Greece came quietly, like the tide. The rhythms of poetry, the balance of form, the weight of philosophy, these things could not be taken by force. They came softly like waves, wearing down resistance with beauty. And when they arrived, they changed Rome forever. Now, centuries later, the sea still remembers the journey. The ruins of harbors lie beneath its surface, covered in coral and silt. Amphorae sleep in the sand, their contents long dissolved. But the water still moves above them, endless and untroubled, whispering the same ancient syllables. Poseidon, Neptune, Oceanus, Mare, each name a ripple, each ripple a story. And sometimes when the world feels too loud, you can go to the edge of the sea and sit in silence and feel that same rhythm working through you, the slow breathing of the planet, the eternal pulse that connects all things. The ocean asks for nothing but attention, and in return, it gives you a sense of belonging that has no name. The Greeks once said that the sea was born from chaos, that it was the first thing to move when the world began. The Romans said it was divine order, vast and disciplined, but perhaps it is both. Chaos and order, old and new, one endless motion, the same motion that carries myths through time. If the gods sleep now, they sleep beneath the waves. Their temples lie broken on the seafloor, their statues turned to coral, their altars covered in sand. Yet when the sunlight filters down through the water, it touches their faces as gently as ever, turning stone into gold, shadow into shimmer. The ocean has not forgotten them. It never forgets. And when you fall asleep tonight, perhaps you'll hear it, the distant sound of waves that are not really waves, but the murmur of stories crossing time, the whisper of Greek voices blending with Latin, the sigh of the sea carrying memory like a lullaby. You are floating among them now, drifting in the great tide of myth. The sea does not care who borrowed from whom. It knows that everything flows into everything else, that no story is ever truly owned, that all things, even gods, are made of the same quiet water. So rest. Listen. Let the ocean speak in its slow, endless tongue. The same sound that lulled sailors to sleep 2,000 years ago still moves through the dark tonight. It carries the past gently beneath the present, just as dreams carry you beneath waking. And somewhere between one wave and the next, Greece and Rome meet again, not in conquest, not in imitation, but in silence.
Ow.
The silence of the ocean, which holds them both, equally forever. The night deepens, and with it comes that familiar quiet, the kind that seems to belong to no single moment in time. It's the same stillness that might have filled a Greek harbor long ago, when fishermen watched the stars ripple on black water, and the same stillness that might have drifted through a Roman courtyard where a poet wrote by lamplight, listening to the soft trickle of a fountain and wondering if the gods were listening back. Time has turned many pages since then. The marble cracked, the temples fell, the languages changed, but the myths, they never really left. They hid themselves within other stories, within other words, within us. In the grand theater of the modern world, you can still find them, if you look gently. They live in our skies, for one. Jupiter, Venus, Mars. Mercury, names that once belonged to gods, now guiding satellites and telescopes through the dark. The heavens remember what we almost forgot. When we look up at night, searching for meaning among the stars, we're still speaking the language of the ancients. It's quieter now, but it's there, woven into every constellation. Every story we tell about light and distance and longing. And if you listen a little closer, you'll hear their echoes in our words too. When we call someone Herculean, we are whispering the name of Hercules. When we describe chaos, we borrow from the Greeks, from the very void before creation. Even in science, in medicine, in psychology, in the rhythm of our thought, the old myths leave fingerprints. Venus gives her name to beauty, Mercury to speed, Apollo to art and medicine, and Pandora to curiosity. The past is never truly gone. It just becomes part of how we speak about ourselves. Think of the world today, the way our stories are told on screens instead of scrolls. Heroes rise, fall, and rise again. They battle monsters, tempt fate, seek love, lose it, and search for meaning in the ruins. It is not so different from the tales the Greeks once told around a hearth or beneath a temple arch. The names have changed, but the pulse of the story, the yearning, the striving, the dream of transcendence remains the same. You could say that humanity has always been telling the same story of gods and mortals, of creation and destruction, of longing for something larger than life, and yet deeply human. We keep retelling it because it reminds us that even our struggles are shared. Even our silence has an ancient echo. Perhaps that's why the myths never died. They adapted. When the world no longer believed in them, they believed in the world. They found new forms, paintings, poems, plays, novels, symphonies, films. They moved into the collective dream, becoming part of the quiet background of thought. And somewhere along the way, they stopped being just Greek or Roman. They became ours. Imagine walking through a museum late at night, the lights dim, the halls echoing with soft footsteps. You stop before a statue of Athena, her gaze patient, her armor dusted by time. She has crossed continents, outlived empires, endured wars and centuries of forgetting, and still she stands. She is no longer a goddess in the old sense, but she has become something gentler, a symbol of wisdom, of endurance, of quiet strength. You don't have to believe in her to feel her presence. That is how myths survive, not by being true, but by being remembered. Somewhere else in a quiet library, a reader turns the pages of the Iliad. The wars are long over, but the rhythm of the line still beats like a distant drum. The reader does not see soldiers or gods, only reflections of human emotion, same ones that have always existed. Pride, grief, love, loss. The details fade, but the feeling stays the same. And that is the secret the myths have kept all along. They are not about the gods at all. They are about us, about the parts of us that refuse to vanish. Our desire to be remembered. Our need to make sense of chaos. Our wish to believe that beauty endures. The Greeks and Romans built their worlds around those desires, and we still do, in quieter ways. Even the modern world, with all its speed and distance, carries the same ancient pulse. We chase ambition like Icarus flying toward the sun. We face impossible tasks like Hercules. We fall in love with illusions. We wrestle with fate. We dream of immortality. The stage is different, but the play continues. And maybe, just maybe, that's what it means for a story to be truly eternal. Not that it is written in stone, but that it keeps finding new listeners, new voices, new ways to be told.
Like the tide.
It leaves and returns, each wave reshaping the shore, but never erasing it. So as the night stretches on, you can imagine all those stories floating through the darkness, softly glowing fragments of a shared dream. The heroes, the lovers, the gods, all drifting together, their borders blurred, their voices mingling. Greek or Roman, borrowed or born, it no longer matters. The myths have become one great, endless lullaby sung across time. Perhaps when the world grows quiet enough, you can still hear them, a whisper beneath the hum of modern life, a reminder that imagination, once awakened, never really sleeps. So let the myths settle now, let the marble fade. The stars dim, the sea grow still. You have walked among gods and poets, through cities of gold and ruins of memory. You have seen how stories change and how they never truly end. Close your eyes. There, in the hush behind thought, they are still waiting. Zeus and Jupiter, Aphrodite and Venus, Poseidon and Neptune, each name a ripple, each echo a reminder that nothing human ever truly disappears. You are not outside of their world. You're part of it, a listener in the same endless circle. The myths have reached you, and through you, they live again. So rest now. Let the centuries dissolve. The gods are at peace. The storytellers sleep. The sea is quiet once more, and somewhere in the distance, beyond dream, a voice begins again, telling the same old story, to a world that will always need to hear it. There are nights when the earth itself seems to remember. You can feel it in the stillness, in the breath of the wind over old stones, in the way the stars shine softly over ruins that have forgotten their names. Greece sleeps. Rome sleeps. But neither truly rest. Beneath the dust and the centuries, their dreams continue long, slow, and filled with the echoes of what once was. The world above changes, machines hum where temples once stood, and lights burn where once only torches glowed, but underneath, the rhythm of myth remains. The gods have not died. They've only learned to dream. Imagine walking through the ancient forum of Rome in the dead of night. The air is cool, heavy with the scent of wet stone and time. The streets are empty now, but if you listen, really listen, you might hear faint footsteps that are not your own. The whisper of sandals on marble, the soft rustle of a toga in the breeze, ghosts, perhaps, or memory, or something in between. You stop before the broken columns of a temple. Once, people stood here to pray, to plead for victory, for love, for forgiveness. Now the prayers have faded, but the place remembers. Every wall, every crack, every shadow holds a fragment of what once was believed. The gods may no longer sit on their thrones, but their names hum in the stone. Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Minerva, further east. Across the Aegean, the same moonlight touches the ruins of the Parthenon. The marble glows like old bone beneath the stars. The city below hums with life. Modern Athens never sleeps. But up here, the past is patient. The columns, though broken, still stand proud, like the ribs of a giant dream that refuses to die. There is no sound but the wind, and yet you can almost hear it, a whisper from another age. Athena's name spoken not in worship now, but in remembrance. The goddess of wisdom, still watching over her city, though her temples have turned to dust. Empires rise and fall, but their myths never fade completely. They sink into the ground, into the language, into the collective sleep of the world. Rome borrowed from Greece, yes, but Greece, too, borrowed from something older. From the murmur of the sea, from the shadows of forgotten gods, from the human longing that predates memory. It was never theft, it was inheritance. A passing of stories from one dreamer to the next. When Rome conquered Greece, the conquerors became the captivated. They built their own temples, but filled them with Greek gods renamed. They sculpted new faces but gave them the same expressions. And even now, centuries later, that same exchange continues not in marble, but in imagination. Walk through any great city today, and you will find them hidden everywhere. In the statues that guard public squares, in the fountains that murmur beneath streetlights, in the facades that echo temple design. Even in our calendars, in the names of months and planets, the myths still hum quietly beneath the surface of ordinary life. January, from Janus, the two-faced god of beginnings. March, from Mars, god of war. Venus in the morning sky, still watching, still radiant. The gods never truly left. They simply found new ways to stay. If you close your eyes now, you might see it not a city, but a memory of one. The streets of Rome bathed in moonlight, the Colosseum silent, the air heavy with the scent of dust and olive wood. The ruins stretch out like a sleeping beast. Somewhere in the distance, a fountain still flows, its water catching the starlight. The sound is soft, like breathing. The empire sleeps, but not in death and dreaming. In the deep, endless dreaming of time. And within that dream, the stories continue to unfold. Jupiter still commands the heavens. Venus still smiles from the sea foam. Mars still sharpens his blade. The poets still sing, though their names have changed. Every storyteller, every artist, every quiet soul who looks at the night sky and wonders each, one adds another breath to that long, slow dream. That is how empires live forever, not in stone, but in story. Somewhere far below the modern city, archaeologists dig. They brush away layers of soil and find a fragment of pottery, a shard of inscription. The letters are faint but familiar, a name, a plea. A prayer to a god no one prays to anymore. Yet as they lift it into the light, the story awakens again. The air around them holds its breath. The gods are patient. They have been waiting for this moment for centuries. In another place, a child opens a book of myths. The pages are crisp, the illustrations vivid. She reads about Zeus hurling thunderbolts, about Hera's jealous rage, about heroes sailing into the unknown. She does not think of Greece or Rome. She does not think of conquest or lineage. She only feels the quiet magic of the story, the pulse beneath the words. And without realizing it, she joins the dream. The myths live through her now, reshaped, renewed, reborn in the imagination of a new listener. That is the true sleep of empires, not silence, but transformation. 1,000 years may pass, and still the stories find their way back to light. Empires crumble, languages die, but imagination remains. It drifts through time like a melody no one can forget. And in the soft hours of the night, when even the cities fall quiet, it rises again, gentle, persistent, eternal. So let the empires sleep. Let their temples fade, their marble crumble, their maps blur with age. The real monuments are not made of stone. They are made of words, of dreams, of breath. They exist wherever someone remembers, or wonders, or listens. You, right now, are standing among them. Not in ruins, but in memory. Not in history, but in myth. And somewhere beyond this moment, beyond this breath, the gods still dream. They dream of their cities, their stories, their believers. They dream of the sea that carried their names from one shore to another. They dream of every listener who ever paused to hear them. And as they dream, the world itself hums softly in sleep a vast, slow echo of all that has ever been believed. So rest now, traveler of stories. You have walked the silent streets of empires long gone. You have seen the faces of gods in shadow and starlight. You have heard the faint music of myth beneath the noise of the world. The night is deep, and the air is still. The ruins breathe, the stories drift, the dream continues. There is a sea that lies between the ruins, between the memories of Greece and Rome, between all that was once sacred and all that remains only as story. It is not simply the Mediterranean, though that is its body. It is older, deeper, more patient. It is the sea of memory itself, the quiet water that carries dreams from one world to another, from one age to the next. If you listen long enough to its waves, you will hear the echo of oars and whispers of words half forgotten, but never lost. The sea remembers everything. It remembers the songs of sailors who prayed to Poseidon and the chants of Roman merchants who asked Neptune for safe passage. Remembers the laughter of children on distant shores, the silence of statues watching from cliffs. It remembers the light of torches, the shadows of sails, the way the wind once carried both prayers and secrets. Beneath that endless surface, the stories drift like slow fish through the dark. The Greeks told their tales beside this water, and the Romans, centuries later, told them again, reshaped but not erased. The myths crossed the sea, the way dreams cross the line between sleep and waking quietly, naturally without ever knowing they have changed. Stand at the edge of that water, if only in your mind. The horizon stretches endlessly, and the air tastes faintly of salt and time. Somewhere beyond sight lies another shore, another city, another echo of belief. The waves murmur, but not in any single language. Their rhythm is universal, ancient, soft. Once poets called this sea the cradle of civilization, but perhaps it is more accurate to call it the cradle of imagination. For everything that Greece dreamed, Rome carried across these waters, and everything Rome forgot, the sea kept safe. When Athens fell silent, when her temples grew cold, the sea whispered her stories to Rome. And when Rome itself began to crumble, the same sea carried her memories onward to Byzantium, to Venice, to every coast where the old gods might find rest. The sea does not take sides. It does not care who borrowed from whom. It only carries endlessly, patiently, the weight of story. Even now, it glimmers beneath the moon, the same moon that once watched over Odysseus and his endless voyage. If you close your eyes, you can almost see his ship small, fragile, yet determined, lighting across the dark water. The air is still, the stars sharp and infinite. Somewhere in that hush between waves, you might imagine the faint voice of a god, guiding him onward. The Romans would later tell his story too, though with different names, different endings. But the essence, the loneliness, the longing, the home that always seems just out of reach, that remained the same. The sea remembers. There is a strange comfort in this endless continuity. The myths may change shape, the gods may trade their names, but the sea between them never stops singing. It hums the same note through centuries, a low lullaby that has outlasted every empire. You can almost hear it tonight if you listen past the noise of the world, the hum of that deep, slow current that connects every storyteller, every dreamer, every civilization that has ever looked toward the horizon and wondered what lay beyond. Perhaps that is why so many of the old myths began and ended with the sea. It is not merely a setting, but a character, a living presence that sees everything, remembers everything, forgives everything. In the stillness of night, the sea is a mirror. It reflects the stars and through them the past. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of memory, the gods are reflected too. Neptune and Poseidon, their images blurred together by time. Two names, one power. Two stories, one silence. They are not rivals now. They're simply echoes of the same idea, that the unknown, the deep, the vast, will always demand reverence. The Greeks gave the sea fear, the Romans gave it order, and both were right. For the sea is both the chaos that births creation and the calm that carries it onward. Imagine now a quiet ship drifting under a sky of endless stars. The crew sleeps, the oars rest. The only sound is the whisper of the tide against the wood. The water glows faintly, lit by plankton that shimmer like spilled starlight. It is as if the sky has fallen into the sea. In this stillness, time folds in on itself. The ancient world feels close enough to touch. You could reach down and feel the same water that carried Greek philosophers to distant islands, the same water that bore Roman legions to new lands. Every drop has touched history. Every wave carries fragments of stories that once shaped the world. And what happens to those stories when no one tells them? They sink, perhaps, but only for a time. Then they rise again, reshaped by the tide. Like shells washed ashore, they are picked up, admired, passed on. The sea keeps what we lose until we are ready to remember again. Maybe that is why the myths have lasted so long, not because of temples or books, but because of this quiet, eternal keeper. The sea, in its vastness, has never forgotten us. When you walk along a beach at night, when the horizon disappears into darkness, you are walking beside that same memory. The wind on your skin, the hiss of the tide, these are the oldest voices in the world. They have spoken to countless generations, each one hearing something slightly different. To a Greek sailor, they spoke of gods and fate. To a Roman soldier, they whispered of destiny and empire. To us, perhaps, they speak of time itself, of how everything returns, how nothing is truly lost. The sea is patient with our forgetfulness. It knows that we will always come back. We are drawn to it not for its beauty alone, but for its reminder of something older than ourselves. It is the breath between myths, the silence between empires, the shimmering line that connects every story ever told. When Greece dreamed of gods, it saw them rising from the sea. When Rome dreamed of power, it saw it reflected in the waves. Both looked outward, and in doing so, both found the same truth, that everything, in the end, drifts. And yet, what a gentle drifting it is. The gods do not rage anymore. The sea no longer demands sacrifice. It simply waits, rocking the world to sleep with its endless motion. If you could listen closely enough, you might hear the voices of both civilizations mingling there beneath the surface. Greek poets and Roman scholars, sailors and sculptors, their words dissolving into one another like salt and water, inseparable now. The myths no longer belong to either. They belong to the sea. So when you stand before it, whether in life or in dream, remember that you are looking at the oldest archive of human imagination. Every ripple is a line of a forgotten poem. Every wave is a heartbeat of the past. You do not need to understand it. You only need to listen. The sea will tell you what it remembers in its own language, slow, rhythmic, eternal. And when you finally turn away, when you leave the shore and return to the world of lights and noise, the sea will remain behind you, whispering. It will keep whispering long after you are gone, long after every city has changed its name, long after even the memory of Greece and Rome has blurred into something dreamlike and distant. The sea will still be there, carrying the same stories, telling them again to the wind, to the moon, to anyone who pauses long enough to hear. Because in the end, the sea does not forget, and neither do we. We are made of the same water, after all. The same salt flows in our blood, the same tides pull at our hearts. We are the listeners the sea has been waiting for. We are the storytellers who return to its edge, century after century, to remember. And as we listen, as we breathe, as we drift, the line between myth and memory fades until there is no difference at all, only the slow movement of the sea between dreams. The night deepens, and the world begins to dissolve into quiet. The voices of the old stories fade until they become little more than the rhythm of your own breath. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the sea still moves, patient as ever, carrying its invisible cargo of myths and memories. The stars hang low, and the air feels thick with history, but it is a history that no longer asks to be studied or understood. It only asks to be felt. Somewhere between the stillness and the sound, between the waking world and the dream, lies the silence of the gods.
It is not.
An absence, not a void, but a gentle retreat, like a curtain slowly falling over the stage once the story has been told. In this silence, every name that was ever spoken, Zeus, Jupiter, Athena, Minerva, Apollo, Mercury, drifts together into one soft whisper that says, "It was all the same dream, told in different tongues." In the beginning, the gods were loud. They thundered from the mountains and raged across the seas. They demanded altars, sacrifices, temples filled with light. But over time, as the people who built those temples grew older, as their children and their children's children learned new languages and built new cities, the gods began to quiet. Their voices became softer, their tempers gentler. Perhaps they had grown tired of shouting. Or perhaps, like us, they began to understand that even power needs rest. So they stepped back, retreating into their statues, into their stories, into the slow pulse of time. They did not die. They simply began to listen instead of speak. You can still feel them if you stand in the ruins. The columns of old temples hold their breath in the moonlight. The marble is cold, but it remembers warmth. A whisper of incense still clings to the air. The gods have become the silence between those stones, the pause before memory returns. When you walk there, you do not disturb them. You join them, because silence, too, is a kind of worship. It is the way we honor what has endured beyond meaning, beyond explanation. The Romans borrowed from the Greeks. Yes, they borrowed their gods, their myths, their symbols. But in doing so, they also inherited their silence, the acceptance that nothing lasts forever, not even belief. The silence of the gods is not empty. It hums with all that has ever been said, all that has ever been sung. It is the stillness that comes after the final note, the moment when the echo lingers longer than the sound itself. It is the hush of marble halls at dusk, the weightless peace that fills the air after centuries of prayers. If you listen closely, you can hear that hum even now beneath the noise of the modern world, beneath the hum of cities and the static of thought. It is the sound of the old gods resting, watching, remembering. They have seen empires rise and fall. They have seen their own names carved into stone and then forgotten. They do not need to be worshipped anymore. They exist in the way all beautiful things do, quietly, endlessly, just beyond our reach. The Greeks dreamed of gods who looked like them, flawed, radiant, human. The Romans reshaped those gods into reflections of empire, disciplined, majestic, untouchable. But beneath both visions lies the same truth, that the divine is simply our longing made visible. When the Greeks prayed to Athena, they were praying to wisdom within themselves. When the Romans praised Minerva, they were doing the same. When they sacrificed to Jupiter or Zeus, they were asking their own hearts to be brave in the face of chaos. And when they finally stopped praying, when the temples fell silent, the gods did not vanish. They folded inward, becoming part of us. That is why their silence feels so familiar. It is the same silence that lives at the core of every human life, the still, quiet center where thought dissolves and only being remains. There is something profoundly peaceful in knowing that the gods have stopped demanding attention. They no longer ask for offerings or songs. They do not strike or bless, only wait, as patient as stone, as vast as the sea, as timeless as sleep. Their silence is not indifference. It is grace. It is the moment when the storyteller closes the book and lets the words sink in. It is the breath after creation, the pause that gives meaning to sound. The Greeks gave the gods personality. The Romans gave them purpose. And now the silence gives them rest. In that rest, the two civilizations finally become one. Greece dreamed, Rome remembered. Greece imagined beauty. Rome built it. Greece gave the gods hearts. Rome gave them names. But now in the silence, none of that matters. They are all simply echoes in the same vast space. The temples of Athens and the forums of Rome are both cradled by the same stars, washed by the same light, and worn by the same wind. Time does not care who borrowed from whom. It only cares that we told the stories, that we remembered long enough for the silence to arrive gently, without pain. And so here we are at the end of the long telling, floating in that silence. The sea has quieted, the air is soft. The stars have faded into a pale gray sky. It feels like morning, but also like eternity. If you close your eyes now, you can almost see the gods walking away, their steps slow and soundless across the horizon. They do not look back. They do not need to. Their stories live on, not in books, not in temples, but in the quiet part of the human mind that still believes in wonder. Perhaps that is what they wanted all along, not to be remembered as rulers or idols, but as moments of awe, flashes of understanding. A Greek poet once wrote that silence is the truest speech of the divine. Maybe he was right. Maybe the silence of the gods is not the end of their story, but the beginning of ours. Because when the gods fall silent, it is our turn to speak. Softly, carefully, as if we, too, are afraid to wake them. Listen, there it is, that faint hum again, the sound that is not quite a sound. It is the same tone the sea sang, the same vibration the marble walls carried. It is what remains when everything else is gone. It is the pulse of the world, slow and infinite. It is what the Greeks heard in the wind through the olive trees. It is what the Romans felt in the stillness of their baths at twilight. It is what we hear now in this quiet moment before sleep, the silence that is never truly silent, the calm that connects us all. The myths were only ever mirrors. In them, we saw our fears, our loves, our flaws. The gods were the reflection of everything we hoped to be and everything we feared to become. Now that the mirrors have cracked, the reflections spill out into the world, shimmering, formless, endless. They become clouds, tides, breath. They become the slow rhythm of the night. You can still see them if you wish, in the shapes of constellations. In the folds of the sea, in the dim glow of forgotten cities, but you do not have to search. They are already here, in the silence, waiting for you to rest. And so we drift, one last time, through the echoes of Greece and Rome, through marble and myth, through centuries of storytelling and centuries of forgetting. The gods watch, or maybe they sleep. It doesn't matter. The world is at peace. The sea sighs softly against the shore, and the air grows warm with dawn. The silence is complete now, not heavy, not cold, but tender, like a blanket drawn up to the chin of the world. The gods are quiet, the stories are still. The listener drifts, and somewhere beneath it all the faintest whisper remains. We borrowed from each other, yes, but we also became each other. Greece, Rome, you, me. The myths are the same breath shared across time. Silence of the gods is the same silence that fills this room now. It is not the end. It is the gentle pause before another dream begins.